Civil war erupts in Labour as Momentum activists try to oust the party's deputy leader. Good evening. In a moment, we'll discuss the climate change protests across the world. But first, to some news that's been breaking in the last few hours. Labour activists head to the seaside for the start of their conference tomorrow in Brighton. But the party's civil war seems to have burst into the open once again. There was a move at the Labour NEC tonight to try and abolish the post of deputy leader, held by Tom Watson. The motion, put forward by the grassroots group Momentum, will be voted on tomorrow at 10 a.m, and sources have told the BBC that they believe that Watson is likely to be ousted. Tom Watson and the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn disagree about many things, most recently and publicly about the best approach to Brexit and to a second referendum. In a moment, we'll be talking to some Labour insiders. But first, Ben Chew is here. And Ben, what has been going on?
Well, Katie, it looks very, very dodgy for Tom Watson tonight. As you said, this motion is expected to come back before the NEC tomorrow. A lower bar to pass, only needs 50%. Expected it will go through, then it will come onto the conference floor. And there's a lot of hostility to Tom Watson. There's a lot of criticism of his divisions with Jeremy Corbyn on things like anti-Semitism, on things like the Brexit, whether we should have a referendum. A lot of interventions. So it's expected, sources we're talking to, that he may well be out by Wednesday. The post will be abolished. Now, how's this gone down amongst the Parliamentary Labour Party? Not very well, according to the MPs that Newsnight has been speaking to. One said that Labour has become a narrow factional cult, and some have suggested they might not even go to Brighton, despite being MPs, which would be pretty extraordinary. So Momentum have been saying that this move is about making the chances of Labour getting elected higher, that Tom Watson has effectively become a liability. Well, the MPs we've been speaking to say that's the exact opposite. The reality is, they say, is that they think Labour is not going to win the next general election, and this move is actually about solidifying the power of the Corbyn faction within the Labour Party before that happens. So the big question, of course, is how is this all going to go down in the country, never mind the Labour Party? Some polls suggesting the Liberal Democrats are now edging ahead of Labour in the polls. How is this civil war, this bloodshed, going to go down with the wider country on the eve of their big moment in the spotlight?
Ben Chew, thanks very much. And I'm joined now by Owen Jones, Guardian columnist, and Sonia Sodha, former advisor to Ed Miliband and chief leader writer at The Observer. Thanks so much for coming in. And this breaking story, I mean, one MP, I think, told Newsnight tonight this is civil war in the Labour Party. It looks like that. Is this a purge? Is this civil war, Owen Jones?
No, I mean, I think a purge is kicking out 21 MPs, shutting down Parliament and saying you're not going to might not abide by the law. And much of the media have lauded Boris Johnson as showing strength of character.
So is this strength of character then to get rid of Tom Watson?
Well, let me put a balanced pundicy hat on. I think if you talk, so basically you've got the NEC, which is the governing democratic body of the Labour Party, elected last year. That's where the membership, that's where councillors, the Parliamentary Labour Party and trade unions send their representatives. If it passes that, then it has to go to the conference, which is like the annual parliament of the Labour Party. Now, I suppose the deputy leadership is a symbolic position. It doesn't really have any power. What it does have is a platform. And the frustration, if you speak, I suppose, to senior Labour figures, is they're not, a lot of them, convinced Tom Watson wants Labour to win the next election, which they think is quite extraordinary.
Well, in fact, this is what Momentum is saying tonight. Momentum is saying the deputy leader is set on wrecking Labour's chances at a general election, so he can't be allowed to.
I suppose the issue is because, I mean, he was elected 4 years ago, and back then he was kind of pretty close to Len McCluskey, the Unite leader. Unite actually recommended members vote for him or Angela Eagle. A lot of people who voted for Corbyn wouldn't vote for him now. I suppose the other, what they have to weigh up in their decision, and I'm often criticised by fellow people on the left for going on about optics too much, often fairly, to be honest, is the media is not exactly best friends largely with the Labour Party. That's an understatement. They're very hostile overwhelmingly. And will, if this is about his platform and the way he uses that platform, because normally deputy leader is a campaigning kind of John Prescott rallying position, will they just turn him into a martyr and overshadow confidence?
Sonia Sodha, civil war? Tom Watson, the martyr?
It's an absolutely dreadful look for Labour going into what is supposed to be a pre-general election conference. There's two things that I think voters will be looking to understand from Labour this week. One is what their position on Brexit is. The second is what they want to do for the country outside of Brexit. And this was supposed to be the week where Jeremy Corbyn was communicating to voters everything that he wants to do for Britain. Instead, we're going into this week with a massive civil war, as you say. I think it's a terrible look, in particular because Jeremy Corbyn and Jeremy Corbyn's allies have always said that Jeremy Corbyn is very committed to party democracy. Tom Watson is directly elected by members. It's true he's been an outrider of the leadership. He's been very pro a second referendum before the leadership itself was. He's now come out and said he thinks there should potentially be a referendum before a general election. But there will be a lot of members, a lot of MPs probably, a lot of Labour voters who feel like Tom Watson is speaking for them. So for Tom Watson, he wasn't even at this NEC meeting tonight. There was no notice given of this motion. It looks like an ambush, and it looks like a party that is determined to quash internal opposition before winning general elections. So I think it's a really bad look for Labour tonight.
I'm sorry, we have had some sound problems earlier on, but I hope you can be heard now. Owen Jones, did you have wind of this? Did you know this was going to happen at all?
I heard about an hour before that something was potentially afoot. So no, I don't think, in terms of the kind of internal discussions that have been taking place, I wasn't sure about that at all. I think the broader problem, to be honest, that actually the Corbyn project faces, if I'm going to be blunt, and this is why it's very different from the Conservative parliamentary party, who are largely supportive of Boris Johnson and all the moves that he has made, quite frankly, including purging a massive chunk of his own parliamentary party, lauded by much of the media as he did so, is that even though the Corbyn project enjoys the support of a large majority of the membership, the danger for Labour is if they become the biggest single party or win a majority in the next election, the fears of senior figures is that for the last 4 years they've been accused of Stalinist authoritarianism. They've got not one deselected MP to show for that, and that the composition of the Parliamentary Labour Party hasn't shifted to allow candidates who are more sympathetic of an anti-austerity, pro-taxing the rich, pro-public ownership message, and that they will struggle with their legislative agenda as a consequence. And it's true, they haven't really shifted. All the caricatures of Labour for being a Stalinist authoritarian cult, a lot of them looked at what Boris Johnson did, because Labour had media headlines about Haringey Council for weeks at a time because they wanted to change some of their councillors, and yet the Tory party,
there are
been
sugar ballots going on, and I think Labour succeeds when it's a broad church, and when it doesn't look like it can contain the views of someone like Tom Watson, and indeed that there are moves to oust Tom Watson as deputy leader, it starts to look less like an electable force. And I think
it feels like neither party at the moment, neither main party is a broad church.
We're seeing divisions on both sides. But where I disagree with Owen in terms of, absolutely their support for some domestic aspects of the Corbyn project amongst the membership, but where there's a big disjunct between the membership and where Jeremy Corbyn stands is on Brexit and is on Europe. And we know
that all these motions have come in.
Absolutely, the vast majority of Labour members are pro-Remain, and they will feel, many of them, like Tom Watson is speaking for them. And so for Tom Watson essentially to face being an ambush tonight for simply expressing the views that a big majority of the membership would abide by, it really jars, I think. So I think there are going to be unhappy members.
Motions going into conference at the moment, essentially saying Labour should support a Remain position. That is essentially Tom Watson's position too. Does this, what's happened tonight, plus these motions, make, Jeremy Corbyn look far more isolated from his party?
Well, no, because, look, what the Labour leadership are now doing is they've adopted wholesale the People's Vote campaign, which was set up less than a year and a half ago, which until recently didn't even support Remain itself. It had no position on the referendum outcome, which was that any deal negotiated with the European Union should be subject to a confirmatory referendum with a Remain on the ballot. What worries me, and this really disturbs me, is there is a culture war in this country which is ripping apart the social fabric of our nation. And we have politicians on all sides throwing petrol on this fire with dangerous consequences, where we have this constant shifting of the goalposts. So now the only acceptable Brexit position for many Brexiteers is no deal. Just quickly on that. And now the only acceptable position increasingly on the Remain side is revoke. And I just think the dangerous...
I just don't think that that's true, actually. And I think the reason why many Labour members, supporters, Labour voters what they're looking for from Jeremy Corbyn is more leadership. And Jeremy Corbyn said, yes, we'll have a referendum, and I think that is important. I think it's important to acknowledge Labour has moved some way in the last year, so absolutely they deserve some credit for that. But what Jeremy Corbyn can't do, I think, is go into a general election saying, I'm kind of neutral on this. I'm going to negotiate my own deal, put it to the people, and I will implement whatever. He has to take a position. Actually, Labour, if they wanted to, there are a number of off-the-shelf kind of options from that we could do with the EU when it comes to Brexit. They are remaining in the EU, a soft Brexit, quite a hard Brexit where we're a member of a customs union and we have a backstop, or no deal. There is no excuse for the Leader of the Opposition who wants to be Prime Minister to go into a general election without being clear what Labour stands for. Voters deserve that, and I think a lot of voters are going to be incredibly confused about the fudge that is the Labour position at the moment.
I'm so sorry, but that's all we've got time for. Apologies. And we did ask the Labour leadership to speak to us this evening, but no one was available.